Hi everyone, my name is Carrie Ramsey and I'm the project manager for the WCAG project. Welcome, this is an exciting day. I do want to say on behalf of all of us, welcome to the launch of the Overcome Her workshop series. We're so excited that you're being a part of it. For those of you who don't know me already, I'm a part of the WCAG project, which stands for Women Entrepreneurs Can. And we are led by Queen's University and funded by FedDev Ontario through the Women Entrepreneurship Strategy Ecosystem Fund. And in fact, Michael Dearmer, I believe, is on the call from FedDev today. And so we do want to say hi, Michael, and welcome. So grateful for the funding to be able to hold these amazing workshops for the women entrepreneurs in the greater Kingston region. So we will continue to let folks in from the waiting room. I'm actually going to be a little bit more behind the scenes today. Heidi Penning you're going to be your moderator today, and I'll introduce her to you in just a moment. Of course, our presenters are in the wings. If Zoom had wings, they are standing in the wings, waiting to present to you Sarina and Natalie from Two Canes Consulting. We're so excited to have them today. Heidi Penning, as I mentioned, is your moderator, and Heidi is the equity officer from Queen's University who works in the Human Rights and Equity Office. As well, we have special guest Q Lethbridge here today. She is our ASL English interpreter, and most of you would have received an email from me prior to this, but if you would like to follow Q, look into your Zoom chat. There is instructions on how to pin her to the top of your screen so you can watch her throughout this presentation. We are recording today, so if you would like to get a copy of the recording of this session, please do email me. I will put my email into the Zoom chat to make sure that that happens. And by all means, please let us know right now where you are connecting from. We love to find out geographically where you are. As well, if you have your own business, please let us know the name of the business. And if you have a website, you can include your link as well. So I will be very probably active in the Zoom chat, but at this point, I would like to pass over the Zoom microphone to Heidi Penning, who is going to be your moderator today, and we'll take it from here. So Heidi, welcome.
Thanks, Carrie. Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to see a few familiar faces, and hope to get to meet some of you at some other point if I don't know you already. Carrie did mention that the recording, the session is being recorded, and her email will be in the chat. And so if you want a copy, you can email her directly. The presentation, there's a presentation, then there's going to be a break at 10:50, and that's to give our wonderful ASL interpreter a break, but please don't go away. You can take a bio break or get a coffee or a tea. Carrie has a really super exciting announcement at the end of this session, so I hope that you stay on to hear all about that. And I guess I'll be moderating the chat as well, but I'm asking you to kindly do put your questions into the chat, but to hold off into the Q&A period after, if possible. So I'm excited as well. Sarina and Natalie, take it away.
Thank you, Carrie and Heidi, and thank all of you for joining us today. So since we are always kind of a package deal, people often don't know who is who. So I am Natalie, and this is my business partner, Sarina. And we will do some more introductions in a bit, but we like to start off with just a few acknowledgements. So the first being a land acknowledgement. We want to recognize that we live and work on Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe territory. And the second acknowledgement is to say that we recognize the challenges that we've had as women with disabilities are certainly valid and have contributed to our perspectives on the accessibility space. However, we know that our experiences have happened through a lens of privilege. We are two white, cisgendered women who haven't experienced socioeconomic barriers to accessing the tools and resources we need on a day-to-day basis. So like many of you, we are committed to continually educating ourselves on the perspectives and needs of all people, especially those whose experiences are different than our own.
And then lastly, we'd like to make a language disclaimer. So basically our personal experiences have been that there's some language that's deemed not to be okay, especially around disability and other sorts of language. And we would like to actually encourage people to use the language that they feel is comfortable, because we find if we put too many barriers around language, then when we have open conversation, people tend to be less comfortable verbalizing their thoughts or comments because they're unsure of what language is appropriate or not appropriate to use. So we actually just, in all of the training and workshops we do, we'd like people just to use whatever language comes freely and comfortable to them. If anything needs more of a conversation or there's language that people are uncomfortable about, then we'll have an open conversation, but we'd like to have a non-judgmental sort of open, safe space to use whatever language you feel comfortable in using.
Okay, so just for a quick overview of today's presentation, we will do some introductions, as I had mentioned, and then we have a bit of an interactive component, just sort of going over the facts and the myths associated with blindness. And then we're going to give a little bit of our personal stories dealing with vision loss. So that's the work behind the canes. And then that sort of leads into how we met and how Two Canes Consulting came to be. And then we are just going to turn it around and ask you guys to consider your own stories and what you've overcome to get to where you are. And then because we want to give you something tangible to take away from today, we are going to go through these 7 steps to being an awesome and accessibility aware, or a AAA entrepreneur. It's a bit of a long title, but let's go with it. And then we will just have some final thoughts before going to break.
So to start off, we're going to do some quick introductions. So my name is Sarina, and this is my business partner and friend, Natalie, and we co-own our company, Two Canes Consulting, which is an accessibility consulting company.
And I got a bit ahead of myself here, but you'll see on the screen, it says, I am deafblind, and that is a statement that I would make about myself. I do want to acknowledge that the D in deafblind is not capitalized here. That is because it is referring to the sort of the medical term for my 2 conditions of vision loss and hearing loss. When you do see the D capitalized in the word deaf, it's when you're referring to somebody who belongs or is part of the deaf community and has more of that cultural connotation attached to it. I know that's something that I learned about only a few years ago, and a lot of people do have questions about. So going back to that statement of I am deafblind, I know many people immediately think of Helen Keller. And we often do with disabilities, we tend to think of maybe the more extreme version of a disability, so complete blindness and complete hearing loss. So Sarina will talk a bit more about our vision loss later, but I will make 2 more statements about myself. I do have 2 dogs, as I mentioned, neither of which is a guide dog, and I don't require any assistive technology or software when I'm using my laptop or I'm reading books. And sometimes this catches people off guard because they assume that there are certain accommodations I would need based on the statement that I am deafblind. With that said, while I don't need any assistive technology when I'm using, say, the laptop in front of me, I'm only able to see one part of the screen at a time. So I am constantly scanning. And I know many of you can relate. Sometimes when you're on a Zoom call, you're listening, but you're trying to get other things done. Maybe you're sending out an email or finishing up some work. That is something that I am not able to do because it's very obvious to everybody on the call because my eyes are frantically darting around the screen. And with regards to my 2 dogs, neither of them are guide dogs. However, a guide dog is something I do plan to use in the future. So all of this to say that we do make a lot of assumptions about disabilities, and often those assumptions prevent us from considering what each person needs or doesn't need.
So in continuing with our introduction, so I'll tell you a little bit more about our vision loss and our diagnosis. So Natalie and I both have a diagnosis of a progressive genetic vision loss condition called retinitis pigmentosa. So many people with retinitis pigmentosa lose peripheral vision and only have central vision, which is Natalie's case. So we have the exact same diagnosis, but very different symptoms. So Natalie can only see central vision. So when we're standing as far apart as where we are right now, she pretty much can only see my eyes if she were to look at me, and cannot see anything else. Whereas I am losing central vision and only have peripheral vision. So I can't see the screen I'm looking at, or any of you right now, for example. I can see peripheral vision. So we actually have the same exact diagnosis, but completely opposite vision loss. We sometimes call each other the yin and yang in different meetings, because she can see certain things that I can't, and vice versa. So this is, again, just to speak further to those assumptions that we have. Normally, you would assume that people with the same diagnosis have the same set of symptoms, but it's not always the case. And that's quite common with disability, as the symptoms vary quite greatly depending on the diagnosis. So we're now gonna, in continuing with a little bit of sort of blindness education, we're going to do sort of an activity that we call myth and fact. Feel free to put what your response would be in the chat. We won't necessarily create an open conversation at this time, but hopefully we can talk about a little bit later during the question and answer period. But I'll just verbally go through them, and then feel free to put your response in the chat if you would like to. So number one, legally blind people are unable to make eye contact. Myth or fact? So this is actually a myth. Many people with severe or total vision loss can either actually make eye contact or mimic eye contact. So for example, Natalie is deemed, well, we're both deemed legally blind, but Natalie specifically can actually make eye contact, because sometimes that's all she can see when speaking to somebody.
I'm very good at eye contact.
Yeah. Whereas for me, I use my peripheral vision, so I might not actually be looking at somebody's face in order to see their eyes. And people that are totally blind, which is actually quite a small percentage of blind people, can still mimic eye contact, because they use auditory clues to locate where they think that their eyes are. And with many people with severe vision loss, using auditory clues for that is still quite accurate. Number two, the loss of vision is the most feared disability among Canadians. That is a fact. So in a study done by the Canadian Council for the Blind, over 80% of respondents felt that vision loss of all disabilities presented was the most feared impairment. Number three, guide dogs are trained to let their blind owners know important things, such as when to cross the street, looking at crosswalk signals, which bus to get on, and when they've reached their destination. Myth or fact? So that one is a myth. So guide dogs are trained to divert people from obstacles, stop at the top of stairs, stop at curbs, basically allow safe navigation through an environment, walk around other people in a market, for example, but they don't necessarily read the crosswalks and let their owners know when to cross the street. We'll talk about something called orientation and mobility training a little bit later in the presentation, which does gives people with vision loss those additional skills to navigate streets safely, etc. And then the next one, people with varying degrees of vision loss may experience vision fluctuations on a day-to-day basis. Myth or fact? So this one is a fact. So Natalie and I, to use ourselves as examples, we both notice daily fluctuations in our vision. We tend to have less vision or feel blinder on days where we have not had a good sleep, or we're overly stressed or overwhelmed with work or whatever else is happening in our lives, or for example, when we have a cold. And this can be true with people with other types of abilities or disabilities, maybe with mobility challenges, other types of vision loss. So it's quite normal for fluctuations to happen day to day.
Okay, just a few more. So the majority of people who are considered low vision or legally blind use a white cane for navigation. So this is a myth. These figures are hard to come by. However, the estimate is that 2 to 8% of the legally blind community opt to use a white cane for navigation, and an even smaller percentage use a guide dog. So this fact always, well, myth, I guess, it kind of throws people for a loop, because I think there's this assumption that blindness is a visible, for lack of a better word, or an easily identified disability, because you're looking out for somebody who's using a white cane and maybe wearing sunglasses, or is walking with a guide dog. So the fact that, not many people who are losing their vision or who are legally blind do use these aids just tells us that there are many more people in the community with vision loss than many of us expect. So a large proportion of blind people have no usable vision at all. We sort of touched on this earlier. That is a myth. About only 15% of blind people have no usable vision at all. So this means no light perception and no ability to perceive shadows. So it really isn't all that common. When you lose eyesight, your other senses get stronger.
I actually fully believe this. When I
Yeah.
was first diagnosed, I thought I was going to have supersonic hearing, but it's not the case.
Yeah. And it's funny because I've always thought this was true, having both hearing and then acquiring vision loss a little bit later in life. My sense of smell is beyond anybody, and anyone that knows me will say that. And I always assumed it's because my other senses weren't so great. I was sort of blessed with this really great sense of smell. So this is actually a myth, though. Your other senses don't get stronger. You just become more adept at tuning into them and using them to make up for any other deficits that you might have. And in orientation and mobility training, as Sarina mentioned, you're really taught how to hone in on those other senses as well. The unemployment rate for visually impaired Canadians is around 70%. So this is a fact, and this isn't reflective of the abilities of people who are visually impaired or legally blind. It is more to do with the lack of support throughout education, in the workplace, as well as discriminatory hiring practices, which unfortunately are still pretty common. So that is the end of this segment. We're actually going to stop sharing for a minute. Sorry, Carrie, I know this makes it a little bit trickier on your end. So now we sort of just want to jump into our stories a little bit. We've gone over some of the myths and some of the facts. We want to take a deeper dive into the realities of vision loss on more of an individual level. So again, revisiting misconceptions. I know we believed this before we ever knew we were going to lose our vision, that when you go blind or you start to lose your vision, you're given a cane or you're given a dog and you just know exactly what to do. You know how to get around. And that's really not the case. There's a lot of time and effort that goes into orientation or O&M training. Orientation and mobility or O&M training. So you're basically relearning basic life skills, how to get around with a white cane, how to get around your house without the use of a cane, how to cook, grooming. So one thing that Sarina and I were both kind of taught in different ways is how to cross the street. Sarina was taught how to cross the street using her hearing only, so listening for the flow of traffic. And for me, it was a little bit trickier. I can't rely on my hearing as much because I do wear hearing aids, so the sound is artificial, so I don't always know where sounds are coming from. So I can use a little bit of hearing, but I also have to rely on the little bit of vision that I do have left. So that's just an example of how we don't realize sort of the work that goes into pivoting and relearning new things when you have a disability. And I know Sarina will elaborate on that more, but we feel like a lot of what we learned through vision loss, we brought to the table as entrepreneurs and when we started a business.
So going back to the orientation and mobility training, so when you think about disabilities or differing abilities in the world, it changes, just like vision loss does. A lot of vision loss diagnoses are progressive in nature. So are many other sort of disabilities. There may be fluctuations day to day, where you need to kind of change how you manage things. So for vision loss, you're looking at the use of assistive technology. You may use a cane one day, you may have a guide dog, you may need a Zoom software, and then as your vision progresses, you may need a speech to text software or a screen reader software. So these things change all the time. And it's important to note that, you know, the need to be adaptable is always there. And we found that really important as we went through, especially when you're looking at orientation mobility training and how the techniques need to change over time. So this is why we name this presentation Going in Blind, because essentially we feel at some point everybody kind of feels like they're going in blind, especially around COVID-19, where things are changing every day. The health stipulations, guidelines are changing every day. There's lots of unknown in the world, especially today with this massive election happening. There's just lots of sort of ways where people feel that they're going in blind and need to readjust their expectations. So what might be different last year might be different this year, and we need to really focus on the need to adapt and change, and that leads to our focus on accessibility, and that being more important than ever, especially during the COVID-19 era.
Yeah, and I'd say part of that too is sort of like just learning to let go of normal and, you know, what normal used to be. I know that's kind of, everybody's had to do that. We're sort of adjusting to this new normal, as Sarina mentioned with COVID. So it's a lot of letting go and learning new ways to do things. So now that we've sort of given our personal experiences with vision loss, I'm just going to quickly give the background of how we met and a little bit about what we do. So a few years ago now, I decided I needed some extra help. I wanted to learn how to use a white cane and get some training through the CNIB. And my Braille instructor, I believe she's here, Tamara, shout out to Tamara if you're watching. When I met with her, she said, you know what, I have this other client who is around your age, has your exact type of vision loss, and I know you guys would just really get along. And I think within 2 days, we had planned to meet up. It turned out we were actually working at the exact same hospital, which for us was really significant because at that point, neither of us had met somebody who was legally blind or living with vision loss. So it really was a special moment for both of us. We sort of hit it off really well right away, and we grew very close over the next year. And one of the things that kind of bonded us was sharing our horror stories about accessibility and sort of our frustration with how inaccessible the world can be and how easy and simple the solutions are. It's just a matter of nobody's being consulted on what those solutions should be. And that's a really common thing, is people with disabilities are often not brought into the conversation. They're not consulted on changes that are being made and things that impact them just as much, if not more than anybody else. So with that, we decided to start an accessibility consulting business, Two Canes Consulting. And so what that looks like for us is doing things like website audits. We do some hands-on training, which has now gone virtual. We review documents for accessibility. Basically anything that an organization needs, we're happy to work with them to help them become more accessible.
And just to give you a couple examples of some of the stories that we shared that highlighted the lack of accessibility, but were also quite funny. Natalie shared once that she got on a bus and sat on another person. There was a gentleman sitting on the seat and she sat right on top of his lap on the bus because she couldn't see that somebody was sitting there. We also shared stories of times where we were in a bar or a restaurant, we put down a glass on a table, didn't realize the table wasn't there. So the glass smashed and people would think we were, far more intoxicated than we actually were. So there's lots of stories that we shared like that, which were funny, but also highlighted these needless things that needed to happen. And just to speak a little bit more, because I don't think I provided an example earlier to tell you about the difference of our day-to-day lives. So we very much have like a completely different vision loss. So one of the examples that we provide to people to explain that is this scenario around dropping a key. So if you drop a key on the floor, most people will see it from like an appropriate distance and be able to pick up the key and identify where it is. Because of my central vision loss, I would have to almost get to the floor and put my nose on the floor to be able to see where the key was. So I would need to get closer. Whereas Natalie, with having only a narrow central vision available to her, she actually needs to get out of the room completely, scan the whole floor to find where the key is, and then come back when she's found the key. So that's just a good example of how our vision loss differs. So going back to what Natalie was saying of us starting 2 Canes Consulting. So we started this business basically to address this lack of accessibility, as she mentioned. We want to talk about this concept of social disability, or the social concept of disability, which is what we truly believe in and what has led us to start the business. And that is that we feel that much of the time, people don't actually fear the impairment or fear the disability itself, but they fear the lack of accessibility. So using us as an example, we don't actually fear going blind or vision loss itself. What we fear is navigating a grocery store with floor signage, with COVID-19, and sort of not being able to socially distance. We fear maintaining employment with progressive vision loss. We might fear raising children with vision loss. There's lots of fears, but none of which actually relate to the actual vision loss itself. So that social construct of disability really led us to the business, because it's not about the impairment. It's about the impact of the impairment and the way that the world is set up. So through 2 Canes Consulting, we're going to try and change the world, essentially. That was our initial goal. So we want to turn this over to you and ask you about a time where you felt that you've overcome something in your life. Something that might be something personal, it might be something with your family, it might be a diagnosed medical condition, or you may be somebody that also identifies as somebody that has a disability. And usually this thing we need to overcome has led to some sort of tool that we're able to use, or some teaching in our lives. And oftentimes that tool or that teaching we're able to actually use in our work life. You may be an entrepreneur, you may be using that in some way there. Feel free to share this tool in the chat. And if that's something that other people can sort of agree with, then maybe we can talk about that later. But take credit for those things, because it's important and something that everyone experiences, whether they feel they have a disability or not.
Yeah, and so Carrie, sorry, I'm going to start sharing the screen again, if that's okay. There.
Go ahead, you should be able to share.
Perfect.
So we're going to switch gears, and we're now Natalie's going to start with talking about the 7 steps of being an awesome and accessibility aware entrepreneur or person. You don't necessarily have to be an entrepreneur to follow these steps. And we're hoping that the remainder of this presentation, being these 7 steps, will provide you with something tangible to take to actually increase the accessibility in your life.
Okay, so step 1, find your people, or even just your person. So as Sarina and I mentioned, we didn't really see vision loss or blindness represented in our own lives before we met each other, and it was a very lonely and isolating experience. I know for me, I had a hard time identifying with my disability, and there was a lot of shame around it, because I felt like I was the only one. That changed definitely after I met Sarina, and look at us now, we're the face of blindness, basically. So being an entrepreneur is very similar in that it can be very isolating. You work for yourself and you set your own hours, which is great, and it sounds great on paper, but it also means, you're not living that 9-to-5 life, or maybe you're doing additional work on top of your 9-to-5, and the people around you aren't in the same situation, and you kind of feel like there's a lot riding on every decision you make, and you might not have somebody to bounce your anxieties or your ideas or your successes off of. So it's great to have a support network, and I know Carrie is sort of the champion of that. She really brings women together through her program, so definitely leveraging programs like this is really great.
So number 2 is check your assumptions. So we talked about, assumptions that we made, even just based on our disability. People assume the same diagnosis, have the same set of symptoms, which isn't necessarily true. This is highly, highly impactful when looking at accessibility, because the more assumptions you make, the less accessible typically you are. So we wanted to use a general example from the current state of the world right now, being COVID-19. A lot of, Sorry, that was for the next one. So back to assumptions. So one of the main assumptions we find people make about blindness, and again, we're going to use ourselves as a personal example looking at vision loss, is when you identify as visually impaired and you're buying tickets for a concert, always you're put in the very front row, which works great for me. With somebody with central vision loss, it is important to be as close as possible. But for Natalie, she would be able to see in the front row, she'd probably be able to see the performer's feet, and that's it. So she would actually rather be in the back row so she could see a wider view of the stage. So that's just an example of an assumption that greatly impacts accessibility that's commonly used.
And step 3 is check yourself, which basically just means sort of looking at how you are putting yourself out into the world and how you're being perceived by others. It's safe to say that most of us have some form of a digital presence right now, whether that's on social media, if we have a personal website or a business website, and just how are we taking the time to acknowledge accessibility. So one great way to do this, and small way, is in your email signature to have an accessibility statement. I know that if I'm working with a company and I see something like an accessibility statement in an email signature or somewhere that is really visible on a website, for me, that's an open door. I feel like I'm seen and I'm sort of being welcomed. With that said, action is the most important thing. So if you're putting that statement out there, you want to make sure that your words and actions are aligning with that action and you are able to accommodate accessibility. And communication and language. So this is just the small ways that we interact with people around us. I think a great example is, I know that if I am ever out somewhere and I need to fill out paperwork, so somebody looking at me, if I'm not using my cane, will not see that I'm visually impaired. So they will hand me a piece of paper, put a pen down and say, okay, sign your name there. And to me, that doesn't mean anything. Usually I'm not even sure where the pen is to sign my name. So really taking the time to be as helpful as possible, explaining where you're putting things down, not using vague directional language, such as saying like, oh, it's over there. If you're giving somebody instructions, really trying to be clear about where you're pointing them, offer to help them find it. Not assuming they have a disability, but just sort of as a general rule. Another thing is, if you're giving instructions, if you say something like, oh, you just fill this form out, or oh, you just click this button and it's easy. We don't know what struggles people are facing, and if doing things in the traditional way isn't available to them and it's being presented in a way that, oh, you just do this and it's simple, sometimes that can sort of discredit their experience and not consider that maybe it isn't just that simple for them. So that's just something to consider in our day-to-day language. I know I've caught myself doing that, and it's sort of an ongoing process. And for the third point is just basic kindness. It's sort of along the same lines. I have a good example. Sarina was recently at a spa. And so she had to fill out a health questionnaire, as we often do now when we go in anywhere. And she often can't see what's written on the health questionnaire, so she's not able to fill it out using pen and paper method. So typically an employee will ask her to answer the questions verbally. And often this is done right in the waiting room in a room full of people. So there's no real privacy. However, at the spa that she went to, they guided her to a private room, and it just felt like such a great gesture to her. It meant enough that she told me about it as soon as she got home, and she thought it was this amazing thing. And it wasn't a huge gesture. It didn't take any more time out of the person's day, but she could tell that they really just thought, what would I want done in the situation if it was me? How would I want to be treated? So it's really just thinking of that, treating others as you would want to be treated.
So the next one is check your privilege. So at the beginning, we made a statement about the privilege we feel we have and how we have to take account for that, because if we don't, it can impact how we work with other people. One example of how privilege can really impact accessibility, specifically in COVID-19. So it's easy to forget the privilege that we have in the world of COVID-19 if you are able-bodied, employed, do not have difficulty paying your mortgage, are not at risk of losing your position or being laid off, can drive all like independently in your own car, generally can create safety for yourself during COVID-19. For people that don't have those privileges, accessibility is really key. And for people that do, it can be easy to think that COVID-19 is not a big deal or is not impactful. So that's just one example in today's world where your own perception of your own privilege can impact what kind of support you provide to other people.
And step 5, be adaptable. I know we keep coming back to this word, but it is important. Accessibility is just this ever-evolving field. What was considered best practice a year ago might not be now or in a year from now. So you just need to be very receptive to changes, whether that be in language that's appropriate. I know we discussed that before, and just general best practice. And it's very much a case of you don't know what you don't know. So we definitely recommend working with an accessibility professional if you are a business owner, if you're trying to launch a program, if you're creating any sort of content, because just getting that professional help really does help you get a good grasp of being accessible. And as Sarina mentioned, we are available to you if you need to email us with any questions or anything you're wondering about.
So the next one is do more than the bare minimum. So Ontario accessibility is governed by the AODA, which is the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and it is governed by a variety of other legislation, including the Human Rights Code, as well as something called WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is the international standard for accessible web content across the world. So when we look at the AODA, it has 4 core principles as well as a set of standards that governs the Act as a whole. But just by following the AODA doesn't mean you're accessible, unfortunately, because legislation really hasn't gotten to the point to actually logistically make Ontario fully accessible. So for example, right now in January of 2021, all public sector organizations and private and nonprofit agencies that have 50 or more employees are required to have an accessible website. So any private or nonprofit agency with less than 50 actually do not legally need to have an accessible website. So our company, Two Canes Consulting, is actually like an accessibility consulting company, and we don't legally need to have an accessible website. So the AODA, as great as it is and as good as far as it's come, it doesn't actually ensure full accessibility, even if people follow it, because there's major gaps in the Act. So it's important to know those gaps and do more than the minimum. So engaging in accessibility training, which is of course something we offer, but there's some free training online. There's lots of supports that you can sort of get to increase your own accessibility.
And sort of along the same line, step 7 is be knowledgeable. So once you understand basic compliance, it's easier than ever to just sort of remain in that discussion and continue educating yourself. There's some really great podcasts out there. I know there's one I listen to. It's not specific to accessibility. It's more about intersectionality. So it does focus a lot on things like race, sexual identity, but disability as well within the context of all these other factors and identities. It's an NPR podcast called Code Switch. I definitely recommend listening to it. They cover a ton of different topics. Social media accounts, as well as bloggers. There's a lot of accessibility advocates that are really active on social media. So following those hashtags, just the hashtag accessibility will bring you a ton of really great people to follow. And there's content like a day in the life of somebody with, trying to think of a really good one. I know there's one, she has MS and she's showing a day in her life as somebody who uses a wheelchair and just the accessibility issues that she faces. So it was really eye-opening for me, as well as hands-on training. And I know Sarina would like to talk a little bit more about that.
So one of the things that we thought we'd do with this training is, again, we wanted you to be able to take something tangible and leave and be able to actually do something, because we find with training, I mean, whenever we go to a training, at the end of it, we want to actually take something and change something about our lives, about our business, tangible to actually do or be able to actually take action on. So we developed a training called Digital Media 101. And it's basically how to ensure that all of your digital media, from your website to all of your social media outlets, are as accessible as you can possibly make them. It's a 2-hour, 2-on-1 training. So Natalie and I provide the training virtually to 1 to 4 people at a time. And we are going to give you sort of the Coles notes of that training for the remainder of this presentation, so you have something to take away that you can actually do in your life. And we chose to do this part because no matter where you work, usually, especially with it in the COVID-19 era, we have a digital presence. Whether you personally have a digital presence for your own social media, whether your company has a website or you have a digital presence around your own employment, even if you work for somebody else. So we felt that it could be applicable to most people. So we thought we'd provide that. So we are also going to offer the full 2-hour training to anyone that participated in the workshop at 40% off. So like I said, we'll give you the overview and you'll have some tangible stuff to take from our overview, but it is a comprehensive 2-hour minimum training, and we're going to provide that at $300 plus HST for anyone that would like to actually take the training with us. And we will also customize it to your needs. So feel free to email us. We'll have our email at the very end of the presentation. And we're happy to do that training at that discount for anybody that attended this training. Now, I'm just looking at the time. We have 6 minutes left before our break. So I think we'll try and get through what we can for our overview here. And then towards the end of the presentation, we may have to do a little bit more when we come back from the break. But we'll see what we can get through in the next 6 minutes here. So the 2 Canes C model is what the training is based off of. So C being SEE. So the WCAG is the Web Content Accessibility Guideline. The AODA, which is the Ontario Accessibility Act, it follows the WCAG to ensure web accessibility. So the WCAG uses an acronym called POUR, P-O-U-R. And POUR basically states that all content is accessible if it's perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So when we were looking at this, we're like, what does that mean? Who's going to take those words and say, okay, yeah, so this means I can do this and make this accessible. So we felt that this POUR acronym, which is what WCAG is based on, was totally basically inaccessible because it didn't actually teach people how to make their content accessible. And it really wasn't user-friendly. So as a company, 2 Canes Consulting, we decided to make our own basically acronym, our own model to help people actually be able to know how to take this legislation and make their web content accessible. So you'll see on the screen, this is the model that we developed. Essentially, we wanted to make it so that it was kind of like an algorithm a step-by-step process that you can do that if you follow this, your content will be as accessible as possible. So it's called C.
We like a good pun.
Yeah, everything's related to our blindness. So the part at the top, so SEE, so the model contains 3 arms or 3 components. If you follow each arm from top to finish, the goal is that you'll be accessible. So it's SEE. So the first is sense. So the stands for sense. And this is how content can be accessed by all of the senses or varying degrees of ability of your senses. So it's how any web content can be accessed by varying degrees of vision, hearing, cognitive ability, for example. And it's a set of strategies to ensure that your content can be appropriately accessed by those varying degrees of the senses. The next one is E, experience. And this is a set of strategies to ensure that users can actually experience content in an accessible way. So it's known with accessibility that user experience is really key, and we'll provide an example of why that's true. So just because something is accessible on paper doesn't mean that people will experience it as accessible. So we'll give you some examples about that as we go forward. And last is engage. This is a set of strategies to ensure that your content can be transferred to other media in a consistent way, evolve as technology evolves, and be accessed by a wide variety of assistive technology. So that is the basis of our C model, the 3 arms of the C model.
Okay, so we will just quickly take a closer look at the S component, and that is sense. So typically in a workshop, we would break this down into 3 different types of content, and that is images, text, and audio video. And depending on who we're working with, we sort of take a look at which digital platforms they're using, which social media platforms, and we sort of go through the strengths and allowances of each, as well as the restrictions and the pitfalls. So I believe, yeah, so we included an example here. So this is how you would include an alt text description or an alternative text description on an image that you might post on LinkedIn. We just included a quick little screen grab here of how to do that.
40-second video of how to do this.
Yeah, so we aren't very active on LinkedIn. We know accessibility, but we're not very active on our social media, I will say that. So if you are going to post, you select your image using the camera icon, your image, and then on the right-hand side of the image, you can add alt text. And so with an alt text description, you want something that is 120 characters or less, ideally 100 or less, and you're just focusing on the key components of that picture, the most important features. And so this is important as somebody using a screen reader. So the screen reader basically reads the content aloud. This would allow them to know what the picture is of.
So in the actual training, just so you know, we go through an example for all the social medias and actually provide step-by-step instructions similar to this for LinkedIn, so that you know how to make all your content accessible and exactly how to do that on all your social media platforms. You have the most control over your own website, but there are ways to make social media platforms as accessible as possible within the limits that they present, which we also will train you on in the training. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I'm just looking at the time. It's 10:50 now. We probably have about 5 to 10 minutes left. Should we take that break now?
Yeah, let's take a 10-minute break and we can come back at 11.
Okay.
All right, we'll see you soon, everyone. Just you can put yourselves on mute, video stop if you'd like. Don't forget to come back at 11. As I mentioned in the chat, we have a big announcement coming, so stick with us.
put in a so that is the one of the alternatives, but there's many alternatives for that, and user experience has dictated that for this example.
Okay, so now we're moving on to the second E, and that is engage. So that is maximizing the reach of your content. Whether, you know, the beauty of technology, especially right now, is it's allowing us to connect with communities beyond those that are immediate to us. It's allowing us to sort of put ourselves out there in the digital world, discover new interests, connect with other people, put content out there, get creative. So we're just really focusing on, you know, how you can get that content out there and push it out further so that more people can see it. And so this is just making sure that the experience is consistent. So for instance, let's say you make this really great video, and so that would be the media, and you share it with your audience, but you don't caption it. And so it's not only inaccessible for people with hearing loss or who are deaf, but so studies done by major companies have found that most of us actually watch videos on our phones with the volume off. It was something like, was it 50 to 80% of people? And I know when we read the statistic, we both kind of looked at each other and we're like, oh, like we totally do that. And I know that if the video isn't giving me value within the first probably 5 seconds with the volume turned off, I'll probably not watch it. However, if there are captions and I'm able to keep up with what's going on in the video, I'm more likely to share it or let somebody know about it. So just thinking of accessibility that way, it's not only helpful for people with disabilities, but it's helpful for everyone. And it kind of ensures that people are going to continue sharing what you're putting out in the world, and everybody's able to sort of access and benefit from it.
So just to put note on that, so that engagement piece is about consistency across media, across platforms. So it's not accessible if it's only accessible on a phone or only accessible on a laptop. It's not accessible if it's only accessible on Facebook, but when you post it to Instagram, it's not accessible. So this part speaks to like the legal compliance that accessibility needs to be accessible in a variety of different mediums, on a variety of different platforms, and by using a variety of different assistive technology. And then the last part of this is that accessibility, something is accessible if it's able to evolve over time with changing technology. So that's where this robustness comes from. Your post needs to be able to maintain accessibility as sort of technology advances. So sorry, that's just to add a few things there. So into the conclusion. So again, our presentation today is called Going in Blind. And as I stated earlier, we really feel like, especially in the world of COVID-19, with everything changing, sometimes daily, weekly, monthly, everyone at some point in this last few months has kind of felt similar to us, where they're kind of going in blind to a certain scenario. It might be through their employment, through their personal lives, with family. We kind of all have these moments where we're like, you know, what is happening right now, and not really knowing what to do. And this is where we have this personal experience of actually going in blind, but we feel that many people can have a very similar experience, especially with COVID-19. All of this highlights the necessity of accessibility right now more than it's ever been. So we promote accessibility in everything we do, of course, and our challenge to you today is to try and do something to increase the accessibility in your business, in your personal life. It doesn't have to be anything major. It really could just be adding that accessibility statement to your email signature. It could be providing that sort of extra kindness or extra accommodation around the language you use the next time you speak with somebody, whether or not they identify as having a disability. Or it could be something a little bit more major, like hiring us to do this training for you, which is not necessary, but there's lots of ways to be accessible in your life. And we, as two people who identify as having disabilities, the smallest thing can make the biggest difference, because these things are not done commonly. So if you were to change something today, it would be something that is actually quite rare. in 2020. So thank you so much for listening to us today. We're going to open it up to the question and answer period, but we're so grateful to be here, and we hope that you've learned something from our presentation.
Thanks, women. We certainly did. How interesting and informative. Thank you so much. We do have a couple questions coming in from the chat. Let me just open it up here.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at the chat, but I have to get too close.
Yeah.
You'd be looking up my nose.
There's one here I'll just read out loud. How did you solicit new clients at the beginning of your business?
That's a very good question. We wasted a lot of money. I will say that. We tried to do the direct mail approach. So we created flyers and sort of advertising our services. And we created lists of, so at the time I was living in Whitby. We both live in Kingston now. I was living in Whitby and Sarina was living in Kingston. So what did we target? We targeted restaurants, for instance. So we figured, they might want things like Braille menus. So let's advertise our Braille menu services. We'll write them a personalized letter. We'll both sign it. It'll have our picture on it. They'll eat it right up. We created all these lists with all the mailing addresses of restaurants. We delivered them, didn't hear anything back.
Probably 500 or 600 we sent
Yeah.
out. And we thought that we would be, we thought we were going to change the world and that all 600 people would call us back because this was so important and it's accessibility, and who doesn't want accessibility, but we were wrong.
So that was a learning experience.
How did we actually get clients? To be honest, we've done a couple things like this where we were able to do some public speaking. We were able to be highlighted in some social networks or social media networks, such as through
Hello Boss Girl. Shout out to Carrie. I think Carrie has single-handedly connected us with a few clients now, actually.
Yeah, so that's been good. And then as the deadline approached for the 2021 web accessibility, we've actually had businesses find us, and we don't know how, but they did.
Yes, we aren't marketing experts. I will say that. If any of you are in marketing, we would love to connect with you. We're not great. So we know how to be accessible on social media. We're not good about being consistently posting on social media.
We're working on it.
Yeah, but I would say that's probably how clients found us. The few posts that we have on Instagram, I think people have taken interest in our story and featured us on things like Hello Boss Girl, and then that's sort of gotten the ball rolling for us.
Maybe a little bit of word of mouth. I talk about it all the time. So anytime I go anywhere, I blab about the business.
Shameless.
People might overhear, and we got one client that way. I was at a dinner party, and I don't know. Oh yeah. I talked for like an hour about the business, and somebody overheard. So nothing overly professional, but we're trying our best. We could say.
But it took him a year to get back to us. So I think that's important too. If any of you are entrepreneurs and you feel like people seem interested, but you're not hearing back from them, sometimes you just kind of have to wait and they'll come back to you usually when you least expect it. Yeah. So that's kind of been the case for us.
Sweet. And here's a question for Sarina. What spa provided the accessible care to you?
Dolce Bella.
Ah, good.
I don't frequent spas. This is not something that I have the privilege of doing on an ongoing basis, so I've not been to too many. But they were very, very accommodating around the vision loss, more than any experience I've had so far.
Oh, so plug for that spa. Another question, what if auto captioning is terrible? Is a bad captioning better than no captioning at all?
That's a great question. Do you want to take this one?
It is a good question. I don't know if I have the best. If anybody wants to share their experience with captioning, I definitely welcome you to in the chat, or if you want to come off mute. I have had live captioning experiences where the captions really weren't great. We have a tendency to double up. So if we have captions, we would also have an ASL interpreter. Yeah, auto captions aren't great. I would say a better alternative is to use, there's a free captioning tool called Amara or Amara. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's spelled
AMARA.
AMARA, and you can enter in your own captions for pre-recorded content. It does take a little bit of time, but it's better than doing the auto captions. Another really great thing to do is to create a transcript. If you're ever on a podcast or if you have a short video and you want to create a transcript for it, that's also really helpful. From a marketing perspective, it's great as well. It helps search engines sort of pick up on your website based on what you're talking about in the video. It won't always pick this up from captions, but if you have it in a transcript, it will pick it up from the transcript.
Our stance that if that is all you can do, then it is better than doing nothing at all. But it's always important to strive for sort of like the higher quality or better option, of course. But if that is what you can do at this point, then it will be appreciated.
Excellent. More questions here for you. How do you stay on top of ongoing changes with platforms, particularly social? They don't tend to announce user interface updates in advance.
So
that is very true.
It's a great question, and that is one of the inherent accessibility challenges of social media platforms. So in our training, actually, we highlight the known challenges with each social media platform and the workarounds around those or how to navigate for those. What we do suggest is, because the social media platforms changes all the time, if you're a business that's promoting yourself on a social media platform, anything you post, because of the lack of control you have for accessibility on those platforms, we recommend that you link it back to your website where you can make that post even more accessible because you have more control on your own website. So we suggest that rarely would you post something solely on a social media platform that cannot be linked back to a platform where you have the most control, being your website. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can commiserate with this because I use Microsoft Teams a lot, and they recently did an update where when being on a video call, all of the buttons had moved to somewhere else on the screen, and we went to hang up on a call, and I realized I couldn't find the hang up button, and I was like, I don't know, it used to be at the bottom of the screen. I didn't know where it was, and everybody was trying to help me find it, but they were all using Macs, which apparently everything looks completely different on a Mac, so nobody could really tell me where it was. I eventually found it. I eventually got out of the call, but it is a frustration. And if you go on Twitter, a lot of disability advocates really voice their opinions about those ongoing changes. So I kind of hope that's something that companies are taking into consideration before, constantly making these updates without getting input, again, from the disability community. There is an example I can think of. It wasn't an interface change, but it was a new feature that Twitter rolled out. I believe it was a couple of years ago. They thought it would be a great idea to have audio only tweets. So instead of typing out a tweet, it would be audio only, which obviously it presents an issue for people who aren't able to hear the audio. They are no longer able to access these tweets. So they very quickly rolled that feature back because it was not accessible. And the disability community kind of came out and said, what are you doing? Like this is not accessible. You're going in the wrong direction. And obviously they heard that and got rid of that feature. But I think it's a slow process, but these companies are starting to listen and sort of learn.
Cool. If only we could turn off Trump's tweets. Another question here from someone who self-identifies as oral deaf. They are an event planner for deaf community events, and they're currently working on their website and wants to know which platform to use to make sure it's accessible as possible. And then there's a bit of a follow-up question here. It's a two-parter. Also, in terms of flyers, what colors are blind friendly? So what platform to use for a website and what colors to use for flyers?
Sure. So I can start and then you can add to that.
Yep.
We're a team approach here. We both know a lot, but together we're best. So for many platforms, even if you pick the most accessible platform, what we'll say is it's important to, if you can, invest in an accessibility audit, because even with the most accessible platform, it's likely that accessibility errors will be found. And with the most accessible platform, they might be less prominent than with a less accessible platform. So for example, Weebly is probably one of the most inaccessible platforms for websites.
Don't use Weebly.
So we would absolutely say avoid Weebly. Even with Weebly, there's just some things that will never totally be compliant because of the limitations of Weebly. We use WordPress, which is one of the more accessible platforms. But even using WordPress, we've done audits where WordPress websites still had accessibility errors. The other thing that we'll suggest with looking at audits, there are free tools to use online for website accessibility checkers. And in our experience, they only catch about 25% of errors against legislation, 20%. Somewhere around there.
It's an estimate.
Some not good number.
Yeah, not very high.
It's still good to invest in an audit just to ensure that you're fully accessible, but we would say WordPress is one of the better ones, and avoid Weebly.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. We use WordPress for our website, and I just did user testing on it, and it was great. You can look up a lot of great resources that WordPress puts out, and they give you an idea of which templates are most accessible. You can use accessibility plugins, and I say that with caution because an accessibility plugin is sort of like on the surface. It doesn't address things that are more behind the scenes, but WordPress does have a pretty good sort of mainframe behind the scenes that the templates are based off of, whereas something like Weebly does not. And there's really nothing you can do about that. Even if you had a professional come in, they wouldn't be able to make any of those changes. I know there was a second part to that question.
Yeah, so it was about colors on flyers. So what we suggest is the highest contrast. The higher the contrast is better. So it doesn't necessarily have to be black on white or white on black. Some people can use like a very dark gray, but typically speaking, the higher the contrast, the better. And there's not specifically, it depends on what you're doing. So this tends to be a little bit more of a complicated question, but we wouldn't provide sort of specific color examples. What we would say in general is high contrast, keep it simple, both with images and text, and keep your language around a grade 8 level. And in our training, we provide a step-by-step process of exactly how to do that, and it gets a little bit more complicated than what we can provide here. But essentially, to accommodate both for vision, cognitive, all sort of aspects of being able to perceive a flyer, looking at contrast, language, and simplicity is important.
Okay, perfect. We have Paula who wants to ask you a verbal question. So Paula, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry, I'm dyslexic. I tried 4 times to write out the question and autocorrect, and we have a fight every moment. I'm a graphic designer, and I have a base in marketing, and something I just wanted to add to. So it's more of a question that packaging. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're making something, your packaging needs to be accessible as well. Now, here's something interesting is, a few years ago, I met up with, keep this short, Paula, was in a government meeting, and it was great. And I met with one of the labeling people. Let's put it that way. I had made the fonts larger for it to be accessible and all the things, and they told me make it smaller. And I actually got a nice email of all the things I needed to change that made it inaccessible. So it was just kind of interesting. And also, I'm not sure if it's changed, but once you make that flip into accessibility, it's a very large commitment that you need to keep up with it, because then the government holds you accountable. So I had put in the post that I have an accessibility, well, my website now is sad and pathetic, but Carrie and I are working on that. But I have an like in print, because I know that at any point in time, someone can ask and request to I see my accessibility package. So it's just one of those things of which can be time consuming. So yeah, I don't know if it was more of a question, but just sort of that thing too, that for the accessible. Sorry, I lose it. I'm dyslexic ADHD that poof, thoughts come in, gone, and
I think I know
yeah.
what you're saying.
Great point. Yeah.
I think what you're
Yeah.
saying is accessibility is a commitment and you need to be on it. And that's very true. Many people we've met with and companies we've met with think accessibility is very simple. Even like walking into a restaurant, they're like, well, you can get from the door to the chair without an obstacle, so we're accessible. People have actually said that. We're like, not so much.
Oh yeah, no, we move, if somebody comes in and they're using a wheelchair, we move the tables apart so they can get through, and we were kind of like, okay.
So that's just what you're saying. People don't know what they don't know, and it is
Yeah.
a commitment and it is complex. To answer your questions about packaging, to be honest, we might get back to you about this a little bit more because this isn't something we've actually sort of addressed in our formal training, we'll be honest with that.
Mhm.
But what I can say from my personal experience is even with packaging, high contrast is good. So to be able to open a package and find out how to open a package for vision loss, high contrast, or even if there's any tactile way or tactile strategies that you can add or braille to your packages, all of which would be helpful. Anything else there?
Another thing is QR codes. Have you explored the use of QR codes?
I have used it, but then I've seen it kind of went out of favor, but I've seen it come back again. So I just,
yeah.
well, and trying to keep it simple because I overthink things out the yin yang because I understand the accessibility, not on all perspectives, but certain perspectives.
Mhm.
So I'm always trying to keep up on that. But I think with accessibility too, now please let me know if I'm wrong, is you have your consistent branding. So that way, so if it's a simplified your logo that, you know, even if you may not fully understand everything, would I be incorrect with that thought process?
Consistency is important as long as what you're being consistent with is accessible. So
Yes.
it's important that you choose the right fonts.
Oh
So,
gosh, yes.
So we recommend choosing sans serif fonts, which are basically fonts without the little ticks on the end of the letters. Using the right size of font, large font if possible. Anything under 12 is considered inaccessible. Anything over 18 and higher is considered a large font. So those are just a few things to consider. We go through all of this in way more detail in our training, of course, but just some things like that when you're looking at logos and simplicity in packaging.
Okay, I'm conscious of the time, thanks. It's 11:24, and I see that Carrie has said that if there are any questions we didn't get to, and I know there's 2 at least, that they can email you. And a question maybe for Carrie, one of the comments was, is the chat also going to be shared? Because it's been a very rich sharing experience. And
Yeah,
Carrie,
anyone who would like the chat, we can share the chat. We have that saved as well.
okay. Yeah, so, sorry to interrupt. So thanks for all the really great questions, and like big thanks to Sarina and Natalie. I always find listening in on these things, you learn at least a few things for sure. And thank you for your time and your expertise. And I really do believe in we can and women together. I think someone has a hashtag in the chat, and that's really super cool. So I'm going to hand it over to Carrie, because drum roll, there's a big announcement. That was my very bad drum roll.
We just wanted to make sure you stayed right till the very end. Was there some feedback there? Maybe I haven't talked. There we go. Hopefully you can hear me well. I'm just, this very quick announcement, and I'll drop a link into the chat right now as well. As of today, we are opening applications for a new coaching program specifically designed for women entrepreneurs with disabilities in the greater Kingston region. Is given priority, but again, if we fill it or we don't, we'll look at all applications for sure. And I do want to point out that the coach for this program is on the call today. So Cheryl Himberg, she's in my bottom left screen. I don't know where she is, but yeah, if you could do a big arm wave so people can see you. Cheryl is the business coach who is going to be providing free coaching to 5 women entrepreneurs with disabilities that we are able to serve. And ideally, because the funding is linked to COVID-19, ideally these businesses existed before COVID-19 began, you were negatively affected, and this coaching will help you perhaps to get back on track, to address a particular challenge and work through that. So I am right now actually going to drop that link into the chat, so it's there. Of course, as well, if you emailed me today and asked for a recording of today's session, then I will send that link to everyone as well, just so you have a copy of it. Please do help us spread the word, because we want to make sure. And again, we've reserved 5 spots because of time and Cheryl's capacity to serve this many women in the short time that we have. But we want to sort of help you pivot as well as possible to meet your needs and move your business ahead. That's what this is about. And if anyone has learned about Cheryl before, actually, Cheryl, do you want to put your website into the chat so they can see the awesomeness that is Cheryl Himberg and Key Element Solutions, which is her company. She is just an extraordinary coach, and anyone would be lucky to sit under her instruction. And I know that she is also involved in the leadership program of the WCAG. And so again, a really great opportunity, I would say. If it's not a good fit for you, and you know someone who it may be a good fit for, please do help us spread the word. We will be sharing this to our social media as well today, but we hadn't revealed it yet because we wanted this audience to be the first. So I hope that this could be a game changer for some of the people on this call today who perhaps need a little more focused assistance in moving that business forward. Cheryl, did you want to add anything? I didn't really prep you on this, but you want to just say hi?
Hi, everyone. No, I'm really excited to be able to take part in this. And I've been navigating the world of disabilities for 18 years. My daughter is 18 years old and has some barriers. She experiences some deafblind as well. So I'm just thrilled to be able to take part in this and to be able to share my expertise and my guidance, and to really help empower the women to be moving forward and creating the businesses that work for you.
Awesome. And again, thanks to FedDev Ontario, because this is all made possible with the funding that fuels the WCAG program. So that's my announcement. Heidi, back over to you.
There you go. Well, I think I would like to thank the participants too that have been on the Zoom today, and to learn a little bit more about the work that you're doing and the work that you're thinking about doing in the future. And again, WCAG is a great organization under Queen's University, and Carrie is moving mountains, I hope, for all of you women. And lastly, again, my deepest thanks, Sarina and Natalie. And I feel that the 3 of us need to go out for coffee, because I think we have lots to talk about.
For sure. If anyone has any questions, feel free to email us. It's info@twocanesconsulting.ca.
Yeah. So, and we are right on time. You did a good pick, Carrie, to pick a Dutch woman. We are always on time.
Love
so,
it.
because we value other people's time, and I know people probably have other things to go to now. And so again, I believe that's all I have to say. And
thank you to Q for the amazing interpretation services today.
Yes, that's true.
It's like watching an artist at work.
So bye, lovely people.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.